Aggregate planning. So we have some different strategies and options when we're coming up with our aggregate planning. Now, this aggregate planning can vary based on product or overall strategy of your company. So ask what their planning method is when you get to your company, and hopefully they know what it is. Otherwise, you might have to see what it is and then figure it out for yourself. So there's really two scenarios here. So we have seasonal demand and then surging demand. So we have like Ben and Jerry's, for example. When do people eat ice cream? Well, if you said the summertime, yeah, a lot of people eat ice cream during the summer because it's a nice cold treat. And another time that people eat ice cream is usually dessert or in the evening time. So if we go just with the summertime, well, that's the seasonal demand. Summer is a season. It only happens once a year. So that's when people generally eat ice cream. And then we have surging demand. So how do we meet increasing demand? Like Beyond Meat is very popular. And so is the Incredible or Impossible burgers and such. All these different fake meat type deals are surging right now. And people are going to them because they see it as a healthy alternative to eating red meat. But there's really two strategies a company can use. They can use a chase strategy. So this helps minimize inventory. That's one of the good things here, because you see the demand goes up and down over time. And production matches it as it goes. It follows it. It's chasing the demand. And one thing is that the manufacturers operate in a make-to-order setting. So if a retailer, let's say Walmart, wants more Ben & Jerry's ice cream to put on their shelves, they'll place the order, and Ben & Jerry's will then manufacture it. One of the downsides here is you need a flexible workforce. You need them to be available because you're going to have more hours, you'll have less hours, you'll need more staff, you'll need less staff because you're chasing it. Your production is not consistent. And costs are very high. Your morale is going to go up during the good times, and it's going to go down in the bad times or when production decreases. You're going to have frequent layoffs. It's not very good for morale. And the cost of hiring people, letting them go, unemployment, all these costs hurt a company. But some companies choose to factor that into their operating costs. The next one is a level strategy. So you have a stable workforce. You're not hiring more people, you're not firing people, you're keeping a stable workforce. And your operating plan is simple and straightforward because you're producing at a consistent level regardless of the demand. Now, this only works if your demand pattern is predictable. And then you have carrying costs or holding costs, and then you have missed opportunity costs, whether you have stockouts or excess inventory. So this needs to be considered when you choose a level strategy. However, as with most things, there's a middle ground, a hybrid strategy. So Land's End uses a hybrid strategy. So they have they bring in retired and former employees for the rush seasons. And then because they're retired, means they don't need to work, but they choose to. So it's a lot easier for them to come and go because they're not depending on that paycheck. And they can mix and match with various capacity and demand strategies to minimize their overall cost. So If they need more workforce, they can reach out to their retired folks. If they don't need them, well, retired folks will say, okay, thanks for having me, and they'll go away. So it's there's a lot of range with the hybrid strategy, as you can see here. So trying to find the sweet spots or the ideal really depends on the company. If you don't have a lot of retired employees, it's not. This might not be as a possible strategy for you, but it's an option because sooner or later you will have enough retired employees. So what about if we just look at our capacity? Well, we can look at hours worked, subcontracting or temporary workers, hiring and firing, and inventory. So a lot of companies base their capacity on hours worked. So some trade-offs. You can only rely on overtime for an increased 20% capacity for a month or two before your employees will get burnt out or they don't want to work any more overtime. I mean, that's a lot of people like overtime because it means more pay, but sooner or later they're going to want to spend time with friends, family, the kids, whatever the case may be. They're going to want that. So we have subcontracting or temporary workers. Well, we can use clothing or retailers. Like you can think of Walmart, Target. They hire a lot of workers during Christmas time. So the trade-off is there's a high training cost for part-time workers. So you're putting a lot of effort into training them, but you're not getting the same value out of these workers because they're only working part-time. And if you get subcontractors, you don't have control with subcontractors. You only have control of the contractor, and then the contractor has control of their subcontractors. Think of building a house. You hire a contractor or a general contractor, and then they hire different subcontractors to do the various parts of a house. For example, pouring the foundation. That's probably one company. Then you have another company that might do plumbing. Another company might do electrical. Another company will do the framing. It might do drywall, painting, all these different subcontractors. You can't tell the subcontractors what to do because you technically did not hire them. You'd have to talk to the general contractor who will then talk to that subcontractor. So hiring and firing. Hiring costs is expensive. And then firing costs are even higher. Because when you fire somebody, well, now that work still has to be done. Somebody else has to do it, which might mean you're not getting full productivity out of someone else who's also having to do that job. They're not fully productive in their original job, which puts a strain on the person. And if enough of that happens, you might lose too many people. So you want to be careful with the hiring and firing. Inventory. High inventory is expensive. Sitting on the shelf is not making money. When it's purchased and it's being shipped out to your customer, then you've made money because it was purchased. You're just completing the process by shipping it out. But you might need to carry a certain inventory level to actually make that money because the customer wants it now. They don't want it in 2 weeks when it's finally manufactured or in 3 months. They want it now. So there's a trade-off because you don't want stockouts and you don't want high inventory. So you got to find that middle ground. So there's a couple demand focus options. So demand focused on price. Your customers want certain prices. They want the best possible price for the value they're getting. And also the lead time. They don't want to spend a whole lot of money in lead time. Neither do you. Because sitting there waiting for something or knowing that you need to wait a week before it arrives? Well, if you're doing manufacturing, you have to order it a week ahead of time because you know it's going to take a week to get to you. So now you might order it 10 days ahead of time because you know it's going to take a week, and you give it a couple extra days just in case. Back orders. Well, this happens when it's out of stock. So your supplier or yourself, if your customer ordered it, you're putting these orders against inventory that should be coming in. So you might have back orders that completely wipe out the inventory that you have coming in on your next shipment. Or your supplier has already over obligated the next shipment they're receiving. So how do you deal with that? Some companies will just say it's out of stock and they don't do back orders. Well, sometimes you have some inventory errors and you oversold a couple. Well, you have to talk to your warehouse folks or whoever controls your inventory and say, hey, we need to make sure these numbers are accurate. And it's very easy to keep your numbers accurate. Don't let anybody fool you. And then we have counter-seasonal products. Well, if it's Christmas time, you might not be able to sell much when it comes to Halloween or Easter. But some people like those holidays, so they might buy that stuff during that time. But those kind of products you probably don't want to have much in stock. If anything, you might want to liquidate that stock to get it out of your warehouse. Now, liquidation can come in the forms of selling it off for pennies on the dollar. You could just give it away. Depending on the product, you might give it to charity. Or you can just throw it in the dumpster. There's a lot of different options. So think about the demand for the item when you're coming up with your plan. And if you can do that, we can make this happen when we develop our aggregate planning. So next, let's talk about developing an aggregate plan. That's one of our tools for this topic. So let's go ahead and move on to that one in the next video.